And now for our mystery guest. Not many television personalities can say they honed their interview skills by cross examining prison inmates. Zia Tong is far from ordinary. This is a woman who can extricate herself from quicksand and build tornado shelters. Zia has found her calling as the co host of the Discovery Channel Canada's flagship show, Daily Planet, and we are all the smarter for it. 5 nights a week, she shares with us mind boggling stories from the world of science and beyond. And she does it without once making us feel like we're back in grade 8 science. Powered by her insatiable curiosity, has traveled the world to more than 60 countries and is working on her fifth language along the way. She says she decided when she was young that she would travel the world and interview geniuses. And when it comes to spreading science to the masses, it seems she just might be a genius herself. Zia Tong is also the host of a special event called Black Sheep, which is hosted at the Soho, where she invites hackers, artists, humanitarians, and others to join in a discussion and often a viewing of a film in a salon style. We are delighted to welcome our mystery guest.
Really, I've had this really strong interest in time for a long, long time since I was a kid. And that's because I have one family member who is amazing. I love her very, very much. All her qualities are absolutely fantastic. Except there's this one thing about her that is very, very annoying. This is my sister. And that is that she is habitually early. And by early, I mean that when we were young, like when I was young, she was 7. From the time this kid was 7, family dinners on Sunday, we would all have to get there 20 minutes before the reservation. And this has continued to this very day. So I said to my sister, Sasha, hey, Sasha, I'm going to this reading, this thing at Get Lit. It's going to be about time, order, and punctuality. What the hell is up with you? Why have we had to do this all this time? Of course, she was there before I even got there at dinner. And she said to me, "Well, I have a real respect for time. I have a respect for punctuality." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But like, how does this make you feel? Why do we all have to do this all the time? Why do you go to the airport 3 hours early? And she said, "It's because, if I'm late, I'm going to be a little bit anxious." And I thought about that and I thought, that's what struck a chord for me because there are billions of people on this planet right now, and we are all anxious about existing in a dimension. There are people who are time anxious about being early, about being punctual, about being late. We worry about our future, we worry about our past. And what's really strange about this, of course, is that time, this dimension, as we know from Einstein, it's the fourth dimension, time and space, and it stretches out. It's so much larger than human scale, and it goes on to infinity, right into the origins of the very Big Bang. And on the other scale of things, time, of course, is incredibly, incredibly deep. And today we can measure processes that go right down in computer time from the femtosecond and the picosecond. And I thought for a moment, if you all wanted to just raise your hand for a second, just like this, and just snap your fingers. In the time it took you to just raise your hand and snap your fingers, we can send a computer signal. I can do a financial transaction 4 times across the Atlantic. I can send a signal from New York to London, 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 and back in the time that you snapped your hands. But the crazy other thing about time, of course, is how we perceive it as human beings. And it's really strange because that's what I love about the science aspect of all of this is that if you're in a blue room, you will perceive time as going faster. But if you're in a red room, time will go slower. And scientists think that this is because it sort of activates our flight or fight response. And it's kind of like in the Matrix where everything kind of slows down and you can focus. The other thing about time, though, is that it also shifts depending on the temperature. So if you're in a very cold room versus a very hot room, and many of you have had this experience, if you're in a place, let's say you're in a desert or a beach area, you'll have this sense that time is really slowing. And scientists have measured this, and they found that if you're in a hot place, time feels like it slows by about 20%. On the other scale of things, we're these human beings, right? And we have these time spans that are limited. But the crazy thing is, ours is really kind of arbitrary. And in the Mediterranean, one of the oldest life forms on the planet is a patch of seagrass. And this patch of seagrass, this life form, is 200,000 years old, and it is alive today. Human beings as a species have only been around for 250,000 years. I mean, the seagrass has been here almost as long as we have. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's the mayfly that is born and lives and mates and dies in the period of 24 hours. And we are sort of somewhere in the middle. So I wanted to read to you guys today a little bit about one of my favorite books, and it's called A Geography of Time, because I am so fascinated by how we come to understand this sort of manufactured human order of time itself. And it's written by Robert Levine, and he is a social sort of psychologist, and he travels all around the world, and he looks at how different people perceive time around the world. But one of the things that I want to kind of focus on is sort of the origin of clock time and how we have all come to perceive it. Before the invention of the first mechanical clocks, the idea of coordinating people's activities was nearly impossible. Any appointments that had to be made usually took place at dawn. It is no coincidence that historically so many important events occurred at sunrise: duels, battles, meetings. The historian Mark Bloch tells the story of one of these appointments. There was a medieval duel at Mons that had been scheduled to begin at the usual hour of dawn, but only one participant showed up. The prompt arriver waited until he believed to be what was the hour of none, as noon was called then, which marked the required 9-hour arrival deadline. He then asked that his opponent's cowardice be recorded and quickly departed. The only problem was that the umpires, after considerable argument, couldn't agree on whether it was actually none when the man left. Eventually, a court had to be convened, and after the discussion of the evidence, the position of the sun, consultation with clerics, who were acknowledged experts in such matters, and vehement debate, the none time claim was upheld. The early arriver was officially proclaimed the victor, and the no-show was declared a coward. This incident was typical of what Bloch described as a vast indifference to time within medieval life. Before industrialization, time reckoning was mostly guided by the demands of the environment. Nature dictated when to plant, when to sow, and when to simply sit and do nothing. The tradition of counting by nature's clocks goes back to the beginning of recorded history. The ancient Egyptian calendar, for example, was called a nilometer, a vertical scale measuring the rise and the fall of the Nile River. Still today, non-industrial agricultural societies depend on nature's clock. The Luval tribe in Zambia divide the year into 12 heterogeneous periods of different lengths that are marked by changes in the surrounding climate and vegetation. The Bahan of Borneo divide the year into 8 periods, each of which reflect a particular agricultural activity, from the beginning of the brushwood to the celebration of the new rice year. The Trobriand Islanders of northern New Guinea start their annual calendar, which marks the beginning of the planting season, with the appearance of a worm, the spawning marine annelid, which makes its yearly showing at the southern extremity of the island chain following the full moon that falls between the middle of our October and November. The Mursi of southwestern Ethiopia also rely on a calendar to direct their agricultural activities. But the Mursi recognize the annual variability of key agricultural events, particularly the onset of the major rainfall period that causes the rivers to flood. As a result, the Mursi treat the calendar as something to be discussed and argued about. The details sometimes change depending on how they feel. For a daily clock, most societies have found the sun to be a perfectly adequate marker. The phases of the moon have often been used to mark the months. Native Americans, when they wanted to more clearly distinguish one month from another, sometimes used colorful names for the moons, like moon when the big trees freeze. But all this changed whenever and wherever industrialization and affordable timepieces have come on the scene together. For the most part, to be sure, early clocks were greeted with great enthusiasm. The invention was seen as a liberator from the unreliable time measures that people had previously depended upon. A new class of time emerged, of the clock, or o'clock. Now, much of the driving force behind these requests for synchronization had resulted from the demands of industrialization, but not all. There were also a few entrepreneurs who recognized the potential of marketing time as a product. Two of these individuals, Samuel Langley and Leonard Waldo, were to play a particularly pivotal role in the standardization movement. Samuel P. Langley, who was to eventually become secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, was the first to cash in on the growing demand for time coordination. In 1867, Langley took over the directorship of a struggling observatory in Pennsylvania and quickly developed its timekeeping capabilities. He then persuaded Western Union to connect the observatory to the city. Soon after, he began to literally sell the time in the form of observatory time signals by telegraphic transmission to industries throughout Pittsburgh. In 1871, for example, the Pennsylvania Railroad declared his observatory time the official time standard and contracted $1,000 a year to receive Langley's signals. Langley also went out of his way to proselytize for standardization, writing a number of articles about the advantages of having a single standard time. And he referred to local time as a fiction and a relic of antiquity, like local weights and measures or local coins, which the progress of centralization and the interchange of commerce and travel had rendered outmoded. Langley established time as a commodity. It was the first twist on the idea that time is money. A few years later, Leonard Waldo, director of a similar time service at Harvard and later at Yale, went a step further. Waldo took the moral high ground by arguing that time needed to be under the control of scientists. The furnishing of correct time, he declared, is educational in its nature, for it inculcates in the masses a certain precision to doing the daily work of life which conduces perhaps to a sounder morality. In a report to railroad commissioners about the needs of factory workers, Waldo asserted that any service which will train these persons into habits of accuracy and punctuality, which will affect all employers and all employees with the same strict impartiality so far as wages for time employed is concerned, will be of great benefit to the state. Now, one of the primary marketing strategies of the clock companies was to promote the integrity, the inherent superiority of clock time itself. Advertising campaigns marketed the moral virtue of punctuality. And punctuality, by the way, wasn't an actual word until the 18th century. It used to mean a stickler for details. The Electric Signal Clocks Company 1891 catalog, for example, advertised program clocks which could be set to ring bells at preset intervals, the sort of clock-bound bell ringers now commonplace in schools. If there's one virtue that should be cultivated more than any other by him who would succeed in life, it is punctuality. If there is one error to be avoided, it is being behind the time. The company claimed that its best model, vividly named the Autocrat, gives military precision and teaches practicality, promptness, and precision wherever adopted. A school, office, or factory installing the system the catalog preached on is not at the caprice of a forgetful bell ringer, nor anyone's watch, as the office clock is now the standard time for the plant. Not only would the Autocrat standardize time, the brochure explained, but it also offered supervisors a means for extending their disciplinary reach beyond their vision. It revolutionizes the stragglers and behind time people, the brochure pointed out, because there is no appeal from these signals. They are the voice of the principal speaking through the standard in his standard clock in his office. The competing Blodgett Clock Company took a similar sales approach. Order, promptness, and regularity are cardinal principles to impress on the minds of young people, argued the 1896 catalog. No better illustration of these principles than this clock can be secured in a school. The infatuation with clock time reached a peak with the arrival of Frederick Taylor and his system of efficiency engineering. Known as the father of scientific management, Taylor took the clock on a crusade to attain the new holy grail of factory management, absolute efficiency. An interesting invention of the scientific management movement, for example, was its motion and time studies, the brainchild of Taylor's early disciple, Frank B. Gilbreth. The technique involved filming a worker's every movement with the dual goals of breaking down a company's tasks into their component parts and establishing standard times for each bodily motion. Optimal times, calibrated to fractions of a second, were established for virtually every task. In the process, as Jeremy Rifkin describes, the various movements were assigned standard names using machine terminology. For example, contact grasp referred to picking up an object with fingertips. Punch grasp meant thumbs opposing fingers. Wrap grasp meant wrapping one's hand around an object. If the task required picking up a pencil, it would be described in the following manner: transport empty, punch grasp, and transport loaded. After optimum standards were established, the times of each worker's every movement were clocked. The factory owners could then separate waste motions like talking, yawning, scratching one's head, or any other extra movements from the movements that led directly to the production at hand. The precision of these measurements was eventually perfected to the level of 10,000ths of a minute. Taylor believed that his method of scientific engineering, when applied with complete objectivity, would produce the perfect streamlined standard time for every job. Taylor's technique was then applied to the factory as a whole. After establishing the minimum standard time of each job, each individual stage in the process was linked together in a stepwise sequence under the regulation of a master clock in the central office. Time and motion studies have been applied to nearly every work environment. Even the smallest tasks have been targeted for standardized times. A time chart from the Systems and Procedures Association of America, for example, suggests target times for activities such as these. Open and close file drawer, no selection, equals 0.04 seconds. Desk, open center drawer, equals 0.026 seconds. Close center drawer, equals 0.027 seconds. Close side drawer, equals 0.015 seconds. Get up from chair, equals 0.033 seconds. Sit down in chair, equals 0.033 seconds. Turn in a swivel chair, equals 0.009 seconds. Move in a chair to adjoining desk or file, equals 0.050 seconds. Taylorism raised the value of efficiency and the importance of clock time to new levels. Economist Harry Braverman argues that the work of Taylor and his disciples may well be the most lasting contribution America has made to Western thought since the Federalist Papers. The new man and woman, observes Jeremy Rifkin, were to be objectified, quantified, and redefined in clockwork and mechanistic language. Above all, their life and their time would be made to conform to the regimens of the clock, the prerequisites of the schedule, and the dictates of efficiency. In time, the stopwatch itself came to stand for Taylorism. Eventually, it would galvanize the enemies of the tick-tock man. And to close, I would like to read a poem for you guys, lest we think that these measures of time are just a relic of the past. And this is a poem by a young man named Zhu Liji. It's called If I Fall Asleep Just Standing Like That. The paper before my eyes fades yellow. With a steel pen, I chisel on it uneven black, full of working words, workshop, assembly line, machine, work hard, overtime, wages. For this, I had to grind away my corners, grind away my words, refuse to skip work, refuse sick leave, refuse leave for private reasons, refuse to be late, refuse to be early. By the assembly line, I stood straight like iron, hands like flight. How many days, how many nights did I, just like that, standing, fall asleep? And that is actually the work of a Foxconn poet, one of the many who work creating our Apple iPhones, our modern symbols of time, who killed himself last year. So I just want to say that I hope we all come to respect time and not control each other's time, because time is truly the most precious thing that we have. And I want to thank you all for your time.